Coaching Inside the Box,
a youth soccer coaching podcast.
A Brit,
a Brazilian,
and an American
discuss culture and environment,
and the impact it has on youth development.
Can you coach inside the box?
Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Coaching Inside the Box. We are so excited to have you today listen and follow along with us. Specifically, guys, we're talking solutions today, and we've had a really great run of Coaching Inside the Box and great episodes and great content. And I think all of us have received really great feedback from those that are following along. And we're really excited to bring to the table and spend quite a bit of time talking about something that we've invested a ton of time to. Andy over the last 40 years, Philippe over the last 5, and me over the last 10, in terms of developing environments to help us manufacture that creativity and create as a talent hotbed here in our hometown of Kansas City. And so with that in mind, we're going to kind of talk about that. But I've got to remind you guys again, please do not forget, we really want to continue to grow this podcast and grow our audience. And it could not help us more. There's nothing that could help us more than if you took just a moment and rate and give us a review wherever you listen to this podcast. It helps other people find us, and we would be forever grateful. With that said, let's talk a little bit about kind of our solution and how we've gotten to create some of these solutions that we have here in Kansas City. Concrete jungles in the favelas of Brazil, Ashington, England, different hardscapes and hard urban areas that have a lot of fast surfaces all throughout Europe. Andy, those have always been something that you've talked about. I've known you now for 30 years, and this has always been fast, intense rebound surfaces is something that has forever been a part of what you talk about. Can you tell us or connect for us, has that background of great players and the environments that they've grown up in, has that been what has connected you or been kind of the impetus or the genesis for you training players, training me the way that you did?
Yeah, the environment that the great players grew up in is weirdly similar. It doesn't matter whether it's Johan Cruyff from Amsterdam. He grew up in the shadow of the Ajax ground, and the city that he grew up in, if translated from Dutch to English, means concrete city, literally. He grew up surrounded by walls, and he talks about how he used walls and curbs to constantly beat on the ball. In the last podcast, we had that quote about from Ashington.
From Sissy.
Yeah, from Bobby and Jackie Charlton's mom, talking about how Bobby used to bang the ball against the wall endlessly, hour on hour. And that's why he scored that incredible goal for England against Mexico in the World Cup in 1966. He had a tennis ball and he just banged a tennis ball. As she said specifically, he had 2 balls, a tennis ball or a small rubber ball, and he banged that ball or those balls against the wall. And of course, when you're working with a ball that small, you have to be precise. So when you move up to a size 5 soccer ball, then you can't help but be way more accurate because you're having to focus on a millimeter on the tennis ball, where it's a square inch on the conventional soccer
Much
ball.
bigger margin for error.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you work in tighter circumstances, and that's what you get. And Paul Gardner, the famous columnist with Soccer America, wrote about Marco Echeverri, when he played for DC United, and he talked about how he grew up in the Taoichi Academy in Bolivia.
Yeah.
And talked about how they always used small balls in the Taoichi Academy, and they pumped them up so that they were like ping pong balls, and they reacted so incredibly fast that you had to be incredibly fast thinker, and had to have, such good skills to deal with these balls. And their fields were, caked hard, fields, and apparently these balls used to explode everywhere off of, the lumps and bumps on these caked hard fields, and so everything they did was designed to be faster than, your normal training environment.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about the Taoichi Academy later in this episode, but and connect it and compare it to some of the spaces that are created for us and our kids to train in the United States. Philippe, I want to bring you into this conversation. So this should come as no surprise to our audience. The three of us coached together in the same club. And Philippe, when you came to Kansas City, initially it was to play university soccer. At the end of your university playing career, you decided to get into coaching. And you had a plethora of options, presumably, of clubs to coach with. Why'd you choose us?
I think the fact that made me choose the Legends Club was that it was similar to what I've lived when I was a kid in Brazil. When I remember when first time I came here and I saw kids doing wall ball, just banging the ball against the wall, and I was like, that's all I did growing up. I had like a garage. I actually told Andy this story a few weeks ago. My family had a house that was like an hour away from Rio. It's in the mountains. And I had like this 3 feet wall with kind of a ramp on top of it and trees at the end. And I would hit the ball into that wall, and it was only 3 feet, so I needed to keep it low, because if I hit it high enough, the ball would roll up, and then it would come back down. But sometimes if I hit it too high, it would get stuck in the trees, and I would have to go up there, walk, and retrieve it. So having that system, for me, of hitting the ball, having to hit it low, and the ball coming back to me, it's actually something that really helped into my game. Like the best thing that I did as a soccer player was shoot from outside of the box, from long distance, and I was good at keeping the ball low, and a lot of the goals that I scored were low shots, really hard, because if you can shoot it low, even if you miss a little bit and it goes up a little bit, it's never going to go over the bar. So just similarities like that was something that really attracted me to this club, and also this philosophy of freedom, free play, being skillful, and all that was something that really made me appreciate what this club does. And yeah, it was similar to what I lived when I was a kid, and I think that's the right way to train, especially the younger kids.
Yeah. So Andy, I want to go back to you because I want to talk, and this is going to be a fun episode because I think we're going to talk about the evolution of the coaching that you've done and now others participate in, such as Philippe and I, in the United States. And when you first started coaching in the United States, and you've talked in previous episodes about Anson Dorrance and his influence on you and helping you to determine that deceptive dribbling and goal scoring was what you were going to focus on. What types of field surfaces or field environments did you seek to put your players in to train them?
Well, just like everybody, I started off in a very conventional mode, and, I was 16 when I first started coaching, which is, another story about how, you get lucky sometimes. And I lived on the same street as the chairman of the Quarry Rovers Boys Club, Frank Yateman, and, he used to stop by and chat. My dad was a well-known local soccer player, and so when I was about 16, I got to play semi-pro for Oxford City, and I was getting my name in the paper and things of that nature. And so one day I was walking up the street, and Frank accosted me outside his home, and he said, "Yeah, young Andy," he said, "we've got an under-8 team at Quarry that needs to be coached, and you'd be perfect. You've got a name in the community now, and so you've got instant respect, and just wondering if you could spare some time, during the midweek and on Saturday mornings to coach these kids." And as much as I really didn't want to do it as a 16-year-old, I felt obligated because that was the club that had given me so much of my opportunity. And so I agreed to jump in and start coaching. But I coached in a very conventional manner. I didn't have this any background, any experience, and so I coached the way that I'd been coached, if that makes sense. And I think that's the way that most of us do. But it's been a gradual process of evolution from age 16 until 62 now. That's 46 years, and over that period of time, I've realized exactly what's holding, English soccer back, the US soccer back, and have endeavored to change every little thing about what I've done as a coach that needed to be changed in order to, give these kids the brave creative leadership for life, which is the most important thing, but obviously make them that player, that one player, that Diego Maradona, that Pelé, that individual that can take the ball by the horns and wrestle it to the ground, make the big play in life. And so, but it's a gradual process, and people just believe that what they've been brought up with is the way to go. And if you don't mind me telling you another story, because this is an illustration of how we're powerfully bound to where we come from. But when I was a little kid, my dad decided that he was going to buy the house next door and turn it into a boarding house, and that my mom, instead of being a car factory cleaner, could actually run the boarding house. She was a good cook, and she kept the house nice and clean and make a good bed, and so her job was to run the boarding house. And so we had a boarding house that was literally next door to the house we lived in, with a driveway separating the boarding house and our house. And we had lodgers from all over the world, because this was Oxford University, country. This was where, we were just a couple of miles away from the university. And so we had boarders from every single country you can imagine. This is the center of the British area, England, British Empire rather. And so we had all of these people coming in from all over the world. And, one of them taught me to play chess when I was a little kid. And so from that point onwards, whenever we had a new lodger, I'd greet the lodger at the front door with my chess, set in hand, and my first question to the lodger was, "Do you play chess?" And so, that was the environment I grew up in. So fast forward here, and I've been playing chess, literally every night after the light went out and I couldn't play soccer anymore. I'd go indoors. Remember, in these days there was 4 TV channels, and so there was nothing to do, because 7, 8, 9 at night there was no kids programs on. And so I would badger the lodgers until they played chess with me, and so fast forward now to I'm in a hospital. I've had a knee operation, and a guy in the next bed had also had an operation, and he looked across at me and he said, he was one of these posh guys. He said, "Hey, old man, yeah, would you care for a game of chess, old boy?" And I said, "Sure, I love to play chess. Break out the pieces." And so we played, and I can't remember the last time I had a game that good, because I got to be really good at the game, and so I was pretty successful against the lodgers. And it went right down to the wire, and with about the last move of the game, I beat him, and he got really angry. So I'm looking at him, that's strange, it's a game of chess, and he said, "Would you care to play again?" And so we played again, and the same thing happened again. It was a great game, went right down to the wire, and I beat him again. And he was, really, really upset. And I'm looking at him like, yeah, a game of soccer matters, but this is a game of chess. This is something I've only ever done for fun, And I said, "Excuse me," I said, "You don't mind me asking, but why are you getting so upset?" And he said, "Well, old boy," he said, "I'm the Oxford University chess captain." And I've since reflected on that many times, because I had coaching. I had really good coaching, because some of these lodgers were good chess players, and they showed me the classic opening, and they showed me lots of nuances of the game. So I had coaches that I basically lived with for a while that taught me how to play chess. And my environment was one where, I was done with soccer at maybe, time of year. It could be 5 in the winter, it could be 7 or 8 at night, and more in the summer. But I was done with, anything that I could do outdoors. There was nothing good to do indoors. So before I went to bed, I always played chess, with one of the lodgers. And so I was in this environment where I played probably 2-3 hours a night, when I was growing up. And I became good, and I never played competitive chess. And I was looking through some old papers the other day, and in my school, and it had me down as playing. My school didn't play soccer. It was one of the upper class schools that didn't play soccer, and I got a scholarship to go there because I was a blue collar kid. But I played school tennis. I ran cross country. I was state 800-meter champion. I played rugby for the school. I played badminton for the school. I played everything apart from, on the list, cricket. I played field hockey for the school. Cricket and basketball. They were the 2 things that I didn't play for the school. And the one thing that was glaring by its absence was I didn't play chess. But I did play chess. And apparently I was pretty good at it, but I never ever knew I was that good at it. And so it was purely environment.
And if we look back at Ashington and Brazil in those previous episodes, we talk a lot about environment, how environment creates it. And so coming back to the original question, Andy, I asked, can you describe the environment that you created for your players in the late 80s, 90s for them to train in, right? I remember specifically part of the year we trained indoor, part of the year we trained outdoor. What did those fields look like?
Absolutely. And so, I'd focused on coaching the moves even back in England before I came over because, I liked the creative part of the game. But I came over to the States to run an indoor soccer facility on Long Island. And that was my first exposure to walls. It was an old MISL style facility that the owner was the owner of the New York Arrows and the Kansas City Comets at the time. Which is how I came to Kansas City in the end, and so I started to get exposure to. There was a smaller field in our facility as well as one regulation size MISL field, and so I started to get exposure to how quick the game was on both walled fields, and I fell in love with it because the ball didn't get out of the field, and so there was no wasted time, there was no breaks, and it was all really fast action. Then I came to Kansas City and, we built 2 big fields and 1 smaller field in the facility. And I ran that facility for 5 years and used the indoor environment to get as much training as I could in for the players that came in and signed up for our camps and our clinics. And, so I used the walls a lot because we had a lot of walls, for rebounding shooting drills because we could get 10 times as many shots rebounding against walls as we could shooting against an outdoor goal and missing and retrieving the ball from the net and wasting all that time in ball retrieval. And so I started, and at the same time I started a company called British Soccer Camps. Challenger Sports is what it is now, and it became the largest camp company in the world eventually. So we've got all this experience of training kids, and then 5 years in I was becoming an administrator and I quit because I wanted to coach, and that's when I started the Legends Club. But in the early days of the Legends, I had this special in with the indoor facility, and so we immediately, as soon as it got cold and dark in late October, start of November, we switched to indoors, and we stayed indoors for 5 months. And we rented the small practice field at All American. And so I used the walls then with you specifically and a lot of other players as rebound surfaces because we either had to do line drills towards a goal at one end of the field, or we could have 18 players banging the ball against the wall simultaneously with all of the chaos that ensued.
It was wall ball. We all had our own lane, right? And
Right.
me versus another player, and it was 2-touch games. So you had a preparation touch in your shot,
Or you could take it first time.
And
Right.
every shot had to be directly after the preparation touch. I think we had 1,000, 1,000 before we could get our shot off. Every shot had to be toe down, ankle locked, land on your shooting foot, and all these games were simultaneous next to each other. And so inevitably a ball would go a bit to the right, and I'd have to put it around a player that was playing in the lane to my right. And then at the end of every round, 3 or 4 minutes, the winner moved up and the loser stayed where they were all the way till we got to the championship lane. And the loser in the championship lane went all the way back down to the bottom, had to work their way up. And to be honest, this shouldn't come as a surprise to those of you guys that watched the first episode. I'm a pretty poor finisher. And so I always played at the bottom of the lanes, but still found it to be enormously competitive. And it fed that competitive gene for me. And while I wasn't a great finisher, I could strike a ball really well because we spent so much time ball striking through that process. Now, Outdoor, though, in those days, Andy, we always trained. I remember most of the time we trained at the Sprint campus, and there was literally no grass on the field. And the goals were these giant aluminum goals that were, 20 feet apart. I could score from anywhere on the field. Well, I couldn't, but the good finishers on the team could. And Andy, why did you choose that type of space to train us in the early days?
Well, I tried to convert the club to playing and training indoors year round.
Sure.
That actually got knocked down by the parents. They wanted to go outdoors. And so I abandoned that effort, which these days I train my teams totally indoors year round. And it's caused a massive spike in their ability. But the parents, slapped me down, and this was my only form of income. So, I couldn't take on all my parents, because I had 5 daughters to feed and, a family to look after. So, I had to back down. And so, we went indoors during the winter, and the parents were okay with that because out of necessity, but, we had this, this area, you remember, the Sprint campus, and, it was lovely. I mean, the grass was superb, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful space for about a week after I rented it. We ran the horses on it for year after year after year. We burned every blade of grass, as you know, because you played in it, and so, it would get very quickly muddy, if we had a downpour, we'd play through the mud, and it would get, during the middle of the summer, when the drought was on, it would get total dust bowl, but the beauty was the ball ran smooth, yep. Because, there wasn't any lumps and bumps and, clumps of grass, because there wasn't any grass. and so, and the guy that used to keep this place, pristine, he just used to shake his head at me because he had all the rest of this area that was grassy and it was good looking, and this one area where we had our goals, and the goals were only 22 yards apart. Yeah. This one area where we had our goals was Dust Bowl territory, right?
Yeah. No,
remember that?
You'd get into the second round of 1v1s, and dust would just hang over the entire field to where you could literally taste it in your mouth as you were sprinting across the field. We laugh about it, but like it was that was character building. And I remember specifically always training with the team 2 years older than us. And we would have 2 different matrices, right? My team would play 1v1s against my team, and they would play 1v1s against their team, or 2v2s, wherever we were in the curriculum. And I remember taking shots from these guys where I'm just sprinting after the guy that I'm marking, trying to keep him from scoring, and then just getting blindsided by one of their players who was sprinting across the field in another direction, who was twice my size and just literally a full-on man, and falling to the ground, mouthful of dirt, and then having to get back up and continue on. And it was a massive character builder, in addition to the bats in the cave radar chaos that ensued on the pitch.
Right. It was total, absolute anarchy. But here's the thing. It wasn't so difficult that everybody fell apart because, remember, you'd had years and years of this training up until that point. Mm-hmm. So you were totally capable of handling that type of chaos. Yeah. And this is the thing is that all of the greatest researchers in world history, theory of evolution going back to Darwin, but all of the people that have related evolution to sports development, every single genius in any single environment has pushed the edge of chaos in order to get where they are. And you can go back into the history of some of the all-time greats. Mozart. His dad was a music teacher. And started teaching him. When he was a tiny kid. To write his own music, etc. And he was terrible apparently on the front end. Tiger Woods. Earl Woods pushed Tiger into, when he was 2, when he was 3, into being a golfer, and so, obviously when a kid, picks up a shortened golf club at age 2, it's going to be awful. So they constantly push the edge of chaos. Richard Williams with Venus and Serena, took them out and pushed the edge of chaos with those 2, pushing them all the time, getting them to go where they hadn't gone before, because the greatest leaps in human development happen where you're uncomfortable, where there's lots of stimuli that you can't quite handle yet, but it's there within your grasp if you really work at it. And so what we have to do is we have to create these small spaces where everybody in the small spaces are fighting for the ball, are using skill, doing incredible things, and where Felipe is from, in Rio, in Brazil. Well, you talk about it. The games. They must have been crowded, right?
Yeah, I remember every time we would get to school, we would get like 30 minutes early, and we would someone would bring either a tennis ball or we would wrap our socks and make a sock ball, and it was literally everyone on the field. So it was 20 aside. It was ridiculous, like a futsal court and 20 on each team, 40 kids on the court. It was literally, you would start with 5, but then people would come in and, you're on this team, you're on this team. And we would play until the professor had to drag us to class. But it was like that, it was crowded. And here's the funny thing, when you're playing with 20 people on each team, will you pass the ball?
No, you just dribble.
If you pass the ball, you're never going to touch that ball again. So literally everyone was a ball hog, and it was understandable because I mean sometimes you would try to steal the ball from your own teammate because you wanted it, because otherwise you wouldn't have it. And those are the games that like I remember vividly as a kid. Like just it was just fun. Like you just played and there was no score, there wasn't anything. But then we would get to class all sweaty, get into the air conditioner. My mom would go crazy because I would always get sick after that. And just making fun of each other, like, oh, I magged you, oh, I scored that goal, blah, blah, blah. No one cared about the score or anything.
Yeah. It's those tight spaces, everybody's a ball hog. And that's why I love 1v1 as a centerpiece for the way that we train our kids. You know, our kids spend every practice doing 1v1s for most of their youth career. And when you're playing 1v1s, you're a ball hog because you got no one else to pass to, right? You get to spend all of that time improving yourself.
But you know, Philippe's environment was 20 versus 20, and that's a problem.
Sure.
Because in that environment, Philippe was obviously one of the better players, so he got lots of ball. But, you know, imagine being the kid that can't walk and chew gum in that environment. That kid doesn't get any ball. So, you know, the rich grow richer, the poor grow poorer in that type of environment, which is not what we do. You know, we play lots of one-on-ones, lots of two-on-twos, you know, but we throw them all into the same small field.
So we get the chaos.
We get the chaos.
Yep.
Bats in a cave, you know, this is absolutely crazy, you know, but they love it because, you know.
They've got a ball next to them.
They've got a ball, they've got opponents, you know, they can dribble, they can shoot, you know, and of course in 2-on-2, you know, there's a player to pass to, you know, and that does happen, and it happens quite significantly, you know, but it's how do we get the best of one environment? You know, the willingness to take players on, and you're not going to give the ball up because you're not going to get it back. But how do we, you know, change that environment so we're getting the chaos?
Sure.
But we also get the ball touches, you know, and we've solved that here at the Legends Club.
Yeah, and I think we'll have an entire episode on 1v1s and an entire episode on 2v2 because there's so much to get into. But I really want to talk environment today, and I want to connect us to the title of this podcast, right? What can we learn from table tennis? And so let me fast forward, right? Well, let me first connect and then fast forward. So in the late 90s, Andy, I remember coaching for you. I was 17 or 18 or whatever, right? Finishing my playing career at Legends before I went off to college. And I remember going to the Roland Park Dome. And the Roland Park Dome was where the Legends practiced indoor. And for those of you guys that are home and don't know what the Roland Park Dome is, it's just a giant dome with sport court on it. We created numerous, maybe 4 small 1v1 fields where the kids could play 1v1, but there were no walls. It was a dome of a bubble, right? So you couldn't get any rebound. And that's where we trained. And it wasn't great for creating deceptive dribblers. It wasn't great for creating goal scorers. And we transitioned in 2008, 2009 and released our own warehouse. Right. And I was a part of that because I'd come back from college. I was a part of the office at that point. And Andy, you'd lease that space off Melrose in Lenexa and specific, I don't know, maybe 4,000 square feet, something like that. And we built a boarded field that was unique in that it had squared corners, and then behind it there was a little bit of space, and so you walled off that space and turfed it. Can you describe what that walled off turf space was and what it looked like and what your inspiration was for it?
Well, you know, and we lost the Roland Park Dome contract because they wanted to use it for other sports.
Oh, okay.
So, you know, I was in a situation where it's like COVID-19. You know, we've developed a great dribbling program during COVID-19 with videos, and it's just gone gangbusters. You know, so, you know, in the midst of winter, you find in yourself an invincible summer. Is the great quote that I love. You know, and so, you know, I looked at my options. I decided, you know, after having looked at this for decades, I decided I'm going to actually create my own custom-designed, you know, indoor facility. And as you said, you know, there was enough room for, you know, one small boarded soccer field, which was great, you know, and we could accommodate the teams in the club at that point in time. Of course, the club's exploded since then. But, you know, and there was just this one little space left. And you know, and so I had the extra boards and I ordered the extra steel work and I put in this long box soccer court. And we played there. You and I played against each other. And, you know, I was still young enough to kick a ball around in those days.
We called it soccer squash, right? Yeah, and there was zero. I mean, you had talked about in maybe the 80s when you first came over, all the British guys that were here had access through your work to the racket club, but you didn't play much squash or racquetball. Instead, you took a soccer ball and banged it against the racquetball walls, right?
Right. And it did wonders for my personal ball striking.
Yeah.
which had always been a weakness of mine because I never had that growing up.
And that was an inspiration for you.
Right.
Right. Okay.
So what happened was, the space was 32 by 12, and I fell in love with, this one box soccer court, and it was fantastic when everybody wanted to be on it playing, but, we didn't have, just enough of them to
Created a big line on the outside.
yeah, to make a whole heck of a lot of difference because we had this one court. So it was highly in demand, and and it was overutilized. But remember the dimensions, because this is pretty important. It was 32 by 12, and we get into a loop where we think, because that's the size we've been using, that's what we need. So, and remember that it was purely by coincidence that we made it 32 by 12, because that was the space left over after we'd put the big field in a storage area.
Yeah.
So we didn't have any more space to put any more courts into, because the whole thing was like 5,500 square foot, the whole facility, including the offices. So what happened was we then decided to upgrade to another facility because the club just exploded with this indoor facility, and so we upgraded to another facility, and we kept two at the same time. We had another facility that was 11,700 square feet, and it was enough for a big field, a smaller field, and only about 4 or 5 of these 32 by 12 box soccer courts, no matter how we configured them, we couldn't fit in any more than 4 or 5, which could only handle maybe 2/3 of a full team squad, because the team squad was 18. So we really needed 9. And then, I don't know if something's working up there, or somebody's just shining on me, but I was literally, because I built these first 2 facilities with some help from parents, but I was primarily the person that built these first 2 facilities in there, cutting wood and doing whatever it took to create this whole new environment. And so I'm just about to get started on the box soccer courts in the space that was left. We'd already built the big field and the small field, and at that point in time, the fates gave me a book, and so I'm exhausted. I've been working 16 hours a day, and I go home and I can't sleep for whatever reason, and I just bought this book called Bounce by Matthew Syed, and I'm reading the book, and I read about Desmond Douglas, the greatest ever British table tennis player who beat world champions. Never actually won a world championship, but beat world champions because, he was just that good. And I'm reading Matthew Syed's interpretation of Desmond Douglas's career and why he's that good. Because Syed is a writer in the mode of Daniel Coyle, Anders Ericsson, Jeffrey Colvin.
He quotes Anders Ericsson in the book.
Right, yeah. Exactly. And so I'm reading about Desmond Douglas, and Matthew Syed remembers that, because Matthew Syed was an English national table tennis, team player. So he was a great player. And so Syed played with Desmond Douglas for years before he was a writer. He's a writer for the Times in London, and of course an author, but writes about sport-related situations, skill acquisition, and as an out-of-the-box way of looking at things. And so he talks about Desmond Douglas and how they were all at this National Training Centre in Reading, which is another great story because half of the British squad were actually from the area around this National Training Centre in Reading. And this National Training Centre wasn't designated as a National Training Centre until later. It was put together by a guy that had this vision and decided to literally build some old garages or turn some old garages into table tennis hotbed. And he actually had half of the national squad out of this Reading, this one street in Reading, was the base for half of the squad. We talk about, British Isles, 55, 60 million people, and half of the squad came from this one area in Reading. So this is an example of how he had it open 24 hours, and he built this culture, and so these players became really, really good, and Syed was one of them. So they brought in to test the national squad, and Desmond Douglas was the star of the squad. They brought in reaction time testers. And they found out that of all of the squad, Desmond Douglas had the slowest reactions.
In fact, he mentions in the book when the results were read, because Desmond was tested for his reactions, but the other players were too. The squad laughed at him. Like, you must have done something wrong. Desmond is by far the quickest reaction on this team. Look how good he is.
Right.
Yeah.
And they would think that because Desmond Douglas never strayed away from the edge of the table. He was this freak that literally could play belly up to the table tennis, which completely blew the minds of opponents from all over the world because they literally never faced a player that didn't back off and play revolving door table tennis, where you just get it back and you get it back and wait for the opponent to make a mistake. Well, Douglas never did that. So, he was playing, a completely different game. He wasn't playing table tennis. He was playing a completely different game to how everybody else played. So Syed is thinking back, when he's writing the book, and he wrote the book, many, many years, like 2 decades after they'd played together for England. And he thought to himself, I wonder what happened with that test, and let's look into, Desmond's background, and let's see if there's something else that explains why Desmond was such a good player.
Before you go there, I want to connect the science to it because I really enjoyed reading Syed's perspective. But he talks about the science of chunking, and elite athletes have this ability to chunk information when they've done it over and over and over again in really small bits, and it gives them the ability to react to something before it happens. And Syed mentions that he's an elite table tennis player, and he's now a journalist, and he's playing against some all-star tennis player in a charity tennis thing, and he told the all-star tennis player to serve it as fast as you can at me, thinking, I am really good at reaction. Like, I am a very fast table tennis player. These giant tennis serves, I'm going to be able to rack to and at least get my racket to it. And he stood no chance at all. And it was because he hadn't spent all this time and developed the scientific ability to chunk that information through small nuances early, right?
Yeah, it was against the I think he's got Klich, Cleek. Who was the fastest server in professional tennis at the time.
Yeah.
And he said he didn't even see the ball as it went past him.
And
so,
tennis is a slower reaction than table tennis.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the things you just said was, that you mentioned reaction. Well, the interesting thing about Desmond Douglas is it wasn't reaction, because he had slow reactions, so. What Douglas actually developed the ability to do, as Matthew Syed points out, is he became predictive. He didn't react. So he knew from playing belly-up table tennis to the table where the ball was going. If he hit this shot, the likelihood was that the next shot would come back in a certain place. And so I read this and I said, look, I got to see this for myself. And, the beauty of modern science, I was able to look up on YouTube Desmond Douglas, and I was able to watch how he would hit the ball. And before the ball had even been struck by the opponent, he was already taking his bat to the next position, and so he was getting ready for receiving the next shot. And it was uncanny because the shot would come back to where his bat was. So he had been there so many times it became predictive. But what was it that made him so good? So Syed said, there's got to be something at work here. So he drove up to Birmingham, England, where, Desmond Douglas lived. And he sat down with Desmond. He said, look, tell me about your life, your career. I want to listen to everything about what it was, that made you this great table tennis player. Because your reaction tests don't jive with the reality that we all saw of you playing such high-level table tennis. And so Syed said that the light bulb moment was when Douglas described how he learned to play the game. Because in the elementary school that he attended, at the end of the school day, they rolled out the desks to the side of the room, and they then, got the table tennis and unfolded them, table tennis tables, unfolded them, and the key line was there was this much space between the end of the table tennis table and the wall. And Syed was, stop, can you throw that one at me again? There was this much space between the end of so you couldn't back off. And Douglas was like, no, we couldn't back off. We had to play this belly up to the table tennis table style. And this is the environment, and it's the aha moment, the environment created the man. Here's this slow reacting individual, that was an absolute gym rat. So he, was there from 4 o'clock in the afternoon until, he had to leave because they closed the building. Winners stay on table tennis. And so he played thousands and thousands of hours of belly up to the table tennis where you didn't have time to react. You had to start predicting, and he had slow reactions anyway. So, he became predictive. He knew from hundreds and hundreds of thousands of shots that if he did the shot here, it was coming back here, and so, and Syed was like, it all makes sense now. The slow reaction time test, when you were the number one table tennis player in England, matches up with your environment. And this is the power of the environment. And yet, what have we done here in Kansas City?
Well, and that was the connection I was going to make, right? Is that, we've spent a few episodes in a row talking about Ashington, England, and talking about Brazil. And we, as a soccer community, we all know who the best players ever, or the best players in the world are, and we all know where they grow up. Yet, when we get an opportunity to create environments, we facepalm. We create Overland Park Soccer Complex.
Well, let Philippe describe this. So Philippe came from the favelas of Rio. And Philippe, what have we got in Kansas City that must have just blown your mind?
Well, several outdoor complexes with like 12, 13, 15 outdoor fields, beautiful turf, everything.
Yeah.
I really remember when I first got to Kansas City, and for some reason, I think it was raining, so our coach didn't want to, our field was a grass field, he didn't want to ruin our field, so he rented the OP soccer complex. And I got there and I looked and I was like, oh my God, that does not exist in Brazil. Like, if you go to a professional academy, like Fluminense that I played, there were, I think, 6 or 7 fields, but it's a closed academy. Like, they don't rent out to anybody. Like, no one can enter. Like, parents cannot enter there. So, like, you don't have those fields in the city. I remember growing up, like, I didn't play outdoor because there wasn't an outdoor field around where I lived. I think the closest one that we were able to actually play at was like 30 minutes away, because all there was futsal courts and little turf fields. We didn't have that. So it definitely blew my mind when I saw all that here.
Yeah, and so, like, I mean, to talk again about like the problem that we have in our society is that our coaches or our training methods, if we learn anything, we try to learn it from some professional academy who has already amassed all the most talented players, and they really only super start focusing with these kids at 13, 14, 15, 16, or in your case 18 when you first showed up at the Fluminense Academy. They totally missed the boat.
And one thing that I have to point out is when I saw here, like, I think it was like U7, whatever, like really young kids playing on that 7v7 field. It looked like ants in a farm. Like, it's ridiculous. You see like 6 kids on the field plus the goalie, and the field is massive. It looks like there are acres there of space. Literally, there's no soccer ability involved. The fastest kid will kick the ball far and will run after it and will get there. There's no development. It's useless.
So what happens when you rent one of these fields? I did, and I had my goals. Like when you played for me. This was later after you'd gone off to college, and maybe you were back with the club at the time. But I'm out there with a bunch of 13, 14-year-old girls. And these girls are used to playing in the indoor facility and playing 1 versus 1 and just rebounding and going for 4 minutes of every round, just going. And so I'm all excited, this beautiful facility, and I pull the goals into 22 yards apart, and inside 30 seconds I had nobody on the field. Because
I can picture it.
And so, these kids that have been used to shooting and hitting the boards and ball coming back and just staying in the game and never taking a break, they'd shoot, the ball would miss, and one kid, they're not going to walk 40, 50 yards, they're not going to run 40, 50 yards to retrieve a ball, because when they get back, they'll be at an extreme disadvantage in the one-on-one because they'll be so tired, and so the kid that's fetching the ball would go and fetch that ball at a snail's pace to conserve energy for when they got back and they wanted to beat their opponent. So, I'm inside a minute, I've got nobody on my field, and there's a kid dawdling over here and a kid dawdling over there to retrieve a ball. And it was the worst practice of 1v1s I'd ever held, because grass would hold the ball up. We were on this field, there was a breeze blowing, and if you hit but with the breeze behind you, the ball ran 60, 70, 80 yards through somebody else's practice on the other half of the field. And it was a total failure, and I dropped my rental immediately after that one practice, because I knew that it was going to be awful for repetition, touches, beating a player, taking shots, learning how to defend, everything that was such a fundamental, important thing to becoming a great player.
And I resist as a coach now. I resist at almost all costs of training outside, because I recognize how enormously inefficient outdoor training is when given the option to do indoor training. And I mean, I remember as a kid, I'd play against Ryan Kaufman, right? Ryan was a typical number 9, fantastic goal scorer, a teammate of mine that played all the way through under Andy. But Ryan wasn't the most most fit kid on the team. And so when he'd get tired, he'd take a shot, intentionally miss the goal. So I'd go chase after it and just wait and just recover. And he was bright enough to do it. And so when we train exclusively indoor with walls and nets around us, that removes that ability, and it makes him work harder and makes all the players work harder. But let's connect this bounce, because I remember when you called me, you were at the Miriam, the new facility that we're building, the 11,000 square foot one, and you said, Andrew, I figured it out. We're going to make the box soccer courts smaller. And then you went on this monologue. I'm reading this book by Matthew Syed and Desmond Douglas, and it's called Bounce, and just so excited and to shrink the box soccer courts, and in shrinking the box soccer courts, improve the reaction or the predictive ability of our players and their ability to chunk this information scientifically so that they can hit it faster and more and get more reps in a smaller amount of time.
Do you remember the multi-page missive I sent you about the rationale behind all this? Because I did a quick study on the science behind it, and I sent you an analysis, because we've never been a dictatorship here. We all have input to the decisions, and I'm in the middle of building this darn thing, and I've had this epiphany, but now I have to change everybody else's mind all at once. So in the middle of construction, I shut down construction to write this persuasive missive about why we needed to create 9 12 by 20 box soccer courts instead of 4 or 5 32 by 12.
So we took a third off of the back. Is essentially what we did, and it went from a really narrow rectangle to a still rectangle, but had a much more square feel to it. And what created as a result, as the kids would bang the ball off the front wall, is it created a game in which they were taking balls from the side, they were taking balls from behind them, they were taking balls from the front wall, and it truly so not only did it improve the number of repetitions they would get in a short amount of time, but it also improved the quality of the repetitions to make them more game-like, because it's not the most common way that you hit a first-time finish in a game is either taking a through ball right into the box, right, or taking a ball from the side across in.
Right. And the other thing that was interesting is that about 60% of all goal-scoring opportunities is from dropping or bouncing balls, and with a 32 by 12 court, most of the balls were rollouts from the front wall. But as soon as we shortened it to 20 by 12, we created that ratio of close to 60-40. With 60% being dropping or bouncing balls and 40% being rollouts. Mm-hmm. So, everything just matched up, and for some reason that book was sent to me in the middle of that, that moment in time when I could actually do something perfect, because we could just fit in. It cost me a whole bunch of money to have the plans redrawn, but we could just fit in 9 box soccer courts with a corridor down the middle, and it just perfectly fitted into that piece of the facility, alongside the small field and the big field, and so it was just weird how it all came together at just the perfect moment, and so, we then constructed, I don't know if you remember this, we constructed a prototype box soccer court, because I'd actually ordered a 12-foot frame and I'd ordered 10-foot frames. So I had 2 10-foot frames for the sides, 12-foot frames for the ends, and so I had the ability to bolt together, from what should have been a 32-foot court, I could put together straight away a 20 by 12 court. So I bolted a 20 by 12 court together, put the boards on it, and rigged the net up so that the board didn't escape out of the top, and then we petri dished it, we tested it, and it was fantastic. you know, and the game went from being really good and really fun to being absolutely stupendous.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, just you know, for want of a better word, it was pinball soccer.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and you know, the ball's just pinballing all the way. You know, you have to think, you have to react, you have to, you know, be accurate. You have to, you know, read the play. You have to get out of the way of balls that are coming off the wall. You know, so that you don't lose the point, because if the ball hits you, you lose the point. You know, and it had everything that the 32-foot court dampened down.
Yep.
You know, all of a sudden it was the, you know, EPL penalty area on a corner kick after a deflection, you know, and you know, you're just trying to read where that ball's going and pounce on it, you know, and hit it perfectly into the corner of the net, and the defenses are trying to get there to clear it, you know, and that was the environment that was created by that one change in design.
Yeah,
and it was wonderful.
And in some ways, the name of this podcast, right, comes out of these box soccer courts, right? Coaching inside the box. We spend so much of our sessions for our kids in either a large box, which isn't very big, but it's a field, right, where the kids are playing 1v1 or 2v2 and going to goal, and constant creativity is required. Or we're on a box soccer court, formerly known as a soccer squash court, where the kids are hitting shot after shot after shot after shot in small, tight spaces. And what's funny is that's really outside the box thinking, because apparently the rest of the American soccer coaching community have figured out that the best approach is to rent out half or a full field on turf, which is nothing like, as Philippe pointed out, the Brazilian talent hotbed, and how players are created. Philippe, do you want to just spend a minute kind of talking about your training sessions and what they look like from a transition from a field to the boxes?
Yeah, pretty much we do like 40 minutes in the field and 40 minutes in the box. The field time, we usually work on skills, just putting them under pressure and having them work on the skills that we've been focusing on that time. Then we do go through 1v1s or 2v2s, depending on what stage of the curriculum they're at. And then we move them to the box soccer, which we put usually 2 kids in a box, and we keep track of points. Basically, we have a system that if they hit certain number of walls in a certain specific order, they'll get a point, and they're competing against each other. So it's good when you have 2 of them, because they're competing against each other. It's more challenging. But also, whenever we put them individually, they can also compete against themselves, trying to break the record.
And it doubles it.
That doubles the repetition. But yeah, we do those 2 ways. We also sometimes do 1v1s into the boxes, which is really hard because there's not a lot of space, and which is brilliant. It will force them to try to be creative. So yeah, those spaces are great for their training.
Yeah.
So let me give you a comparison, because I've always been one for evaluating the stats, and my best ever outdoor shooting practice, first time finishing outdoor shooting practice, somewhere between 30 and 50 shots in an hour, you know, and you know, and it wasn't game related. You know, you couldn't put a defender in because you'd get 5 or 6, you know, 15, 20, you know, and so it had to be very dampened down compared to game circumstances to get that 30 to 50 shots in an hour. Riley Smith, who holds, as far as I know, the club record for first-time shots in a box soccer court on her own in an hour. This is 10 4-minute rounds with a 2-minute break between each round. She got 1,474 shots in an hour. 30 to 50 versus 1,474. What do I want my kid doing?
Yeah, month after month, months turn into years.
So here's the next evaluation process. I keep score sheets, as you know, on everything that I do. So I took a year's worth of practices for my daughter, you know, and you know, I went high side, low side to allow margin of error, you know, and I estimated for the whole year, based on all the score sheets that I had, the number of shots she'd taken in, you know, Legends practices for the year. And because of our environment, you know, it was obviously, you know, off of the charts. And in 1 year, she had taken between 60 and 80,000 shots. Well, she's got a full ride to college, you know, and so, you know, she's not going to come out of college with any debt at all. because she can beat players in the dribble, and she can score from distance, and so. And this is not a fluke, and we tend to put players into college as forwards or, at the very least attacking midfielders. And, they're the special players that go on and do a tremendous job of helping their teams win the game, because that's the type of brave, creative leader that we develop. But it comes from repetition of the key skills and getting better and better and better. And that's what's happened.
You nail the key skill thing, because I think maybe the biggest issue that I see when I look at other coaching methodologies is that they try to teach too much, right? And so at best, players become the jack of all trades, master of none. And deceptive dribbling and ball striking, shooting are enormously transferable, right? If you're a really good deceptive dribbler, you can settle the ball, right? You have a good touch. Your ability to take balls out of the air is great. If you're a really good shooter, you're also a really good passer. If you can play 1v1s or 2v2s in a really crowded area, then you can see the field. And so I think that the biggest win that we've had in terms of our training methodology and the environments in which we put these kids is that it creates players that really are specialists and focus in on one thing. And they're really, really, really good at those most important skills, but they can also do the other stuff too, just as everybody else can.
Well, the rocket science transfers to the everyday stuff. And the rocket science is incredible finishing and the ability, like a Pelé or Ronaldinho or Maradona, to beat a player.
To create space.
In tight spaces in front of goal, to put the ball in the net. And so if you're an incredible dribbler and you're an incredible finisher, the rest of the field, receiving and passing is a walk in the park. And yet, most coaches spend 95% of their time on passing and receiving, not recognizing that you can get both if you just work on deceptive dribbling and goal scoring. And we see it in our national team. We can't dribble and we can't score.
Yeah, and so that's a big problem of nowadays soccer, because people go to Guardiola and say, "Oh, but he does the tiki-taka, one touch pass." But the tiki-taka only works if you have Messi, if you have the special player that will, at the point that they pass the ball around for a minute, it will isolate that player, that special player, who will do anything with the ball and will create the goal scoring opportunity. It's not, even if you see Spain after they won the World Cup in 2010, which they barely did, even though they had a fantastic team. They almost did, and the later World Cups, they didn't do very well because they couldn't do anything different when they got to the attacking third. Against Russia in the last World Cup, they had 79% possession, and they lost the game because they couldn't score. They got to that attacking third and couldn't do anything.
Look at the EPL right now. Who is it that's taking Manchester City to the cleaners right now? It's Liverpool. But look at their forward line. Yeah. You've got three great dribblers, goal scorers in their forward line. So, they've got those special players that can do it on their own as well as combine with each other to do amazing things, and great finishers. And so that's what it takes. And we go back to this defense wins games garbage again, don't we? It does not. It's 0-0.
Yeah, instead of developing the Messi who actually wins the game, they try to develop the other 10 players who make Messi possible.
But here's the interesting thing. If you look at Liverpool's squad, throughout his squad, even the big guy at the back, Virgil, is a good dribbler. He's very talented with the ball on the floor. So he hasn't just gone for the big donkey that clears the ball.
And Pep says that himself. He says the first thing I look for in the back is somebody that can dribble.
Yeah. So it's two fullbacks. Yeah. Unbelievable at getting forward, getting into the attacking third, scoring goals, creating goals. And so from every position on the field, they've got dribblers and goal scorers that can, actually make a huge difference.
Yeah. And so for those of you guys listening, we just talked about the evolution from a training perspective and moving toward walled training only because our club only trains inside. And that's somebody that grew up training in this methodology, in this curriculum, but at least half the year outside. I only train my teams inside because it's so much more efficient. And the quality of players that are coming from my teams is significantly greater than the teams I had 8 years ago that trained half the year outside. I mean, significant. It is just so obvious. It can't be missed.
And there's one other thing. The sun always shines on indoor soccer. I've been now years and I've not cancelled a single practice until COVID-19.
Yeah.
I hadn't cancelled a single practice in years. And I was cancelling 15, 20%, on a year-round basis. In the spring, 50%. Yeah. Here in Kansas City with all the thunderstorms, cancellations, and lots of coaches, that aren't that committed actually used to love to cancel their games so they could have a night off. Yeah. I'm the other guy. I'm the guy that didn't ever want to cancel and totally frustrated when the weather would prevent me from coaching.
Yeah, 100%.
And so we never have to cancel, so our coaches work harder, but, hey, we got the right guys.
More of it. Yeah,
they,
get more of it.
They love to work harder.
Yeah, and so we started with one indoor facility in Lenexa, Kansas. Then we had two in Lenexa and Miriam, and then we moved into a new, bigger, not newer, older building, but a bigger one that now has 60 box soccer courts or so, 15 different fields, all various sizes and shapes, and we'll spend episodes talking about that, and then expanded onto the Missouri side, and we have two facilities as well with multiple box soccer courts and multiple fields in Lee Summit, and then as well, we've now got a TSB facility, the soccer box facility in Dallas, Texas, soon to be Houston, Texas, St. Louis, Omaha, Northwest Arkansas, Connecticut, and so we're seeing this grow really, where we're seeing more and more box soccer courts and a greater recognition that as Andy learned from, or Matthew Syed learned from looking at Desmond Douglas's background, that small tight spaces improve the ability of the athlete to take in information and predict what's going to come next.
And the provision of these indoor facilities for the kids in communities around the country is absolutely vital, because unless we do this, the kids are not going to get the street soccer environments of years gone by. Those are gone. Cars have destroyed those environments. So it's vital that we actually create small, tight, fast spaces, and the philosophy that goes with it, which of course we have, and it's vital that coaches all over this country, all over the world do it if the kids are going to truly make this once again the beautiful game, because it's slowly losing that beautiful game designation because we're cookie cutting kids tactically, out of these insipid environments that do not really challenge the kids in small spaces to be absolutely incredibly brilliant. So it's just not as entertaining as it was.
It comes back to this ongoing theme from episode to episode. We in America especially, but all across the world as well, have to manufacture creativity. We have to create opportunities for creativity to flourish. It's not organic.
Yeah, we have to manufacture the environment.
Yep.
Of course, and if we're good enough at structuring the environment so that the content is the best content for also promoting creativity, once you put together the culture, the environment, the coaching philosophy, and the Brave Creative Leadership for Life training, you've got it all. But it has to be designed that way. And this is decades in the making. We've written books about it, and we've designed the perfect environment, for developing that. Not the perfect. There's always improvements that can be made. But I think we're in the last, 5%, of it's 95% perfect is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
We've done it for so long, and we've spent so much money, and we've analyzed it to such an incredible degree. Now we need to reproduce this all over, North America. Before I die, I want to see the USA win a World Cup. My adopted country, I'm now an American, I took citizenship, and that's my ambition. England's already won one. I'd love to see them win another, but I'd like to see the USA win one.
Not happening.
Yeah, I don't think it is happening. But the USA is further down the pike than England. England's better than the USA by far right now. So how do we win that World Cup? We've got to create these deceptive dribblers, goal scorers, these leaders that want the ball all the time, that think they can make the difference, that are hungry to make the difference. And we're not going to do it on these wide open, desert complexes that we're putting in all over the place. Great for games, terrible for learning.
Yep, 100%. Well, guys, thanks again for following along on this Coaching Inside the Box episode podcast journey. But again, I can't reiterate enough, any rate or review you can provide us wherever you listen to this podcast would be super appreciated. Guys, thanks again. Great show.
All right.
Thanks
guys.
again, Andrew. Coaching Inside the Box,
a youth soccer coaching podcast.
A Brit,
a Brazilian,
and an American
discuss culture and environment
and the impact it has on youth development.
can you coach inside the box?